I ruined a man's life 20 years ago over a stolen design concept. Today they announced him as my new regional director. His name is Ethan Hayes, and it came in a corporate email. The message was about restructuring, but it was really about him. A sanitized portrait showed a man with dark hair and perfect teeth. I am 45 years old and a senior project manager. My entire career is built on competence and quiet, steady work. That single email felt like a demolition order for my life. The face in the photo was older, marked by 2 decades of success, but the eyes were unchanged, and I knew he remembered everything. I built a family and a home on the foundation of that old sin. My wife, my kids, my comfortable mortgage all felt like a fragile lie. The rest of the day was a complete blur of pointless activity. I sat in meetings and stared at blueprints without seeing a thing. Every quiet moment was filled with a cold, rising dread. My past was no longer in the past. It was on the executive floor. As I left the office, a new car was in his designated spot. It was a long black German sedan that radiated silent authority. Standing in the concrete garage, I finally understood the situation. This was not a coincidence or a second chance. This was a reckoning that had finally arrived for me. I went home that night and pretended that everything was perfectly fine. My wife Sarah was in the kitchen preparing a simple weeknight dinner. She has been my partner for nearly 23 years of my life. We built this quiet, suburban existence together, one brick at a time. She asked me how my day was, and I gave her a simple lie. I told her that things were busy, but otherwise completely normal. She looked at me for a moment, sensing something was wrong. She knows me better than anyone, but she did not press the issue. We ate dinner while the television played the national news in the background. The conversation was about our daughter's tuition and our son's summer job. This was the life I had, the one I had carefully constructed. It was a life of PTA meetings and weekend trips to the hardware store. It was all real and tangible, yet it felt like a theatrical set. The foundation of it all was a lie I told an academic committee. I had presented Ethan's innovative design concepts as if they were my own. He was a brilliant, trusting student, and I was ruthlessly ambitious. The committee believed my story, and he was expelled for plagiarism. I told myself at the time that this was how the world worked. I buried the guilt under years of hard work and professional achievement. I rationalized that a man like Ethan wouldn't hold a grudge for decades. He was successful now and probably saw it as a youthful mistake. This was the story I repeated in my head all evening long. I tried to believe it with every fiber of my being, but the image of his expensive car kept appearing in my mind. The quiet confidence of that machine dismantled all of my flimsy excuses. The next morning, I walked into the office with a forced sense of calm. The air was thick with the nervous energy of a corporate shakeup. An all-hands meeting was scheduled in the main conference room. Ethan stood at the head of the long table, looking perfectly composed. He spoke about vision and synergy and all the usual corporate nonsense. I tried to make myself invisible in my chair, studying a spot on the wall. Then he looked directly at me from across the room. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet acknowledgement. A small, knowing smile played on his lips for just a second. After the meeting, an email from his assistant summoned me to his office. My heart hammered against my ribs as I made the long walk. I expected to be fired in the most humiliating way possible. His office was large, with a glass wall overlooking the entire city. He told me to sit down and then close the door behind me. He said he remembered me very clearly from our time in college. I waited for the anger, but his voice was calm and measured. He spoke about people making mistakes when they are young and ambitious. He talked about the importance of growth and second chances in life. Then he offered me the lead role on the Crestwood Tower project. It was the largest and most prestigious contract our firm had landed. This project was a career-making opportunity for any person in my position. He told me this was a chance for me to prove my character. He wanted to see the man I had become after all these years. I left his office holding the thick project file in my numb hands. I felt a confusing mixture of profound relief and absolute terror. I threw myself completely into the Crestwood Tower project. The work was a way to silence the fear in my own head. I spent 18 hours a day at the office, drowning in spreadsheets. The project was my entire world, a fortress built of architectural drawings. My life at home began to evaporate into a series of missed calls. Sarah told me that she never saw me anymore. She said I was becoming a ghost in our own house. I tried to explain the importance of this single project. I told her this was our chance for a better future. She heard the words but saw the lie behind my exhausted eyes. The project deadlines were aggressive, bordering on the impossible from the start. I went to Ethan to voice my concerns about the schedule. I explained that the timeline did not account for realistic supply chain issues. He listened patiently, with a look of complete understanding on his face. He told me he knew the schedule was a challenge. He said he gave the project to me because he had faith. He believed I was the only manager who could handle this pressure. I left his office feeling a strange sense of misplaced guilt. I felt ashamed for doubting his intentions for a single moment. This project was not a punishment, it was a genuine test of my worth. The long hours were my penance, a way to earn my redemption. I convinced myself that success was the only apology that would matter. The exhaustion was proof that I was finally making things right. The first real crack in the project appeared 3 weeks later. Our primary steel supplier suddenly backed out of their firm contract. It was a catastrophic failure that threatened the entire project timeline. I spent 72 hours without sleep, calling every contact I had. I finally found a new supplier at a significantly higher cost. In a team meeting, Ethan publicly praised my tireless crisis management, but later that day, he sent me a private email. He expressed his deep concern about my initial choice of vendor. The email subtly implied the failure was my own lack of foresight. My team started to grow resentful of the constant, relentless pressure. They saw me as the source of their misery, not Ethan. I could feel their silent judgment in every project meeting. Then, a critical error was found in a set of finalized blueprints. A junior architect on my team had made a small but costly miscalculation. Ethan insisted on a formal review of my team's entire workflow. While searching for files, I found an email from Ethan to corporate. He was discussing the initial budget overage from the new steel contract. He described the situation as a result of my poor managerial oversight. The phrase was a carefully chosen corporate dagger, clean and professional. It was designed to protect him while pinning all the blame on me. The carefully constructed illusion of my redemption finally began to crumble. I was not being tested. I was being methodically and deliberately framed. I was working late again, trying to undo the damage from the blueprint error. The office was a silent tomb, lit only by the cold glow of my monitor. The rest of the company had gone home hours ago to their families. My own family felt like a distant memory, a life lived by someone else. I was chasing a solution to a problem that seemed to grow with every fix. The pressure was a physical weight on my shoulders, a constant crushing force. I had forgotten what it felt like to rest or to feel at peace. My phone buzzed for the 10th time, but I ignored it again. A sharp noise made me look up from the screen. My wife Sarah was standing at the entrance to my cubicle. She was not angry. Her expression was one of cold, quiet disappointment. That look was far worse than any shouting or screaming. She told me I had missed our daughter's 21st birthday dinner. It was the one event I had sworn on our lives I would not miss. The gift I bought for her was still sitting on the passenger seat of my car. Sarah said our daughter kept looking toward the restaurant door, expecting me. She told me that I had finally broken my last promise to them. Her voice was steady, without tears, which made the words cut even deeper. She said she no longer recognized the man standing in front of her. She accused me of willingly sacrificing our family for a man from my past. I tried to offer my usual excuses about work and the project's importance. The words sounded hollow and pathetic even to my own ears. As she spoke, my eyes drifted up to the executive offices above us. Ethan was standing there in his darkened office, looking down at the scene. He was not surprised or annoyed by the commotion in his empty building. He was simply watching us with a look of calm, detached satisfaction. It was the look of a scientist observing a successful experiment. In that single instant, the entire elaborate trap was revealed to me. This project was never about building a skyscraper or testing my skills. It was about this exact moment of personal and professional ruin. The work was just the tool to destroy my life outside the office. The impossible deadlines and the constant failures were all part of the design. My family's pain was not collateral damage, it was the primary objective. Sarah left without another word after seeing the look on my face. I did not try to stop her from walking out of the building. The argument was over because the truth had finally been revealed. I drove home through the empty city streets in a state of shock. My house was no longer a home. It was just a collection of objects. Every photograph on the wall felt like an artifact from a lost civilization. The silence was a living thing, filling every room with my failure. A cold text message from her instructed me to pack a small bag. I placed her suitcase on the front porch for her sister to collect. I did not hear the car when it arrived or when it drove away. The next morning at work felt like walking into my own funeral. My colleagues avoided my gaze and whispered as I passed their desks. An email invited me to a mandatory meeting with Ethan and Human Resources. I walked to the conference room with a strange sense of calm. There was no more anxiety, only the certainty of the coming end. Ethan sat at the table with a look of practiced, sincere disappointment. He calmly detailed my project failures to the expressionless HR manager. He mentioned the supplier issues and the critical blueprint errors. He then brought up my public argument with Sarah the previous night. He framed it as a sign of my inability to handle professional stress. He said he was concerned for my personal well-being, therefore he was removing me from the Crestwood Tower project immediately. They were not firing me, as that would have been too merciful. Instead, they reassigned me to a new temporary role. My new office was a small, windowless room in the building's basement. My task was to audit digital archives from projects completed 10 years ago. It was a meaningless job designed to crush a person's spirit. It was a clear and deliberate signal for me to quit my job. My former team members now treated me as if I were a ghost. The isolation was absolute, a perfect reflection of my new reality. I had lost my career and my family in a single day. I spent 3 days in that windowless basement room doing nothing. I stared at the login screen, unable to summon the will to work. The humiliation was a thick blanket that smothered every other feeling. My mind was a silent, empty space, devoid of thoughts or plans. Then, on the 4th day, something inside of me finally shifted. The profound despair did not evaporate. It solidified into something hard. It became a cold and heavy object in the center of my chest. The pain was gone, replaced by a quiet, clarifying sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim mourning his life. I was an instrument. I stopped thinking about my wife and the empty house. My family was a casualty of a war I had not known I was fighting. My only focus now was the man who had orchestrated my downfall. My new job was a cage, but they had made a critical mistake. They left me inside the system with my old network credentials. My access was limited, but it was not completely gone. They had tasked me with sorting through the company's digital archives. They had unknowingly given me a map to all of their secrets. During the day, I performed my pointless job with perfect compliance. I audited old files and generated meaningless reports for my new supervisor, but at night, I stayed late in my basement tomb and began my real work. I started a systematic search for every file associated with Ethan Hayes. I focused on the records from his previous company acquired in a merger. I used my expertise to analyze old project budgets and vendor contracts. I examined every change order and expense report he had ever approved. I was not looking for a single mistake or a simple error in judgment. I was hunting for a pattern of corruption buried deep in the data. My nights were filled with the glow of the monitor and endless columns of numbers. There was no anger, only a cold and patient resolve fueling my search. I was no longer looking for answers or a path to forgiveness. I was carefully and methodically searching for a weapon to use against him. After 2 weeks of relentless searching, I finally found the pattern. It was hidden in the budget files of 2 major projects from Ethan's old firm. A small consulting company was hired late in both construction cycles. The company was named Axiom Strategic Partners, and I had never heard of them. In both instances, their hiring was followed by massive cost overruns. These overruns were disguised as unforeseen expenses and professional service fees. The projects were completed, but they were millions of dollars over budget. Axiom Strategic Partners had no real website or public presence. It was a ghost company with a legal registration and nothing else. I spent my nights digging into public records and archived business filings. I was looking for the names of the people behind this obscure entity. After hours of tracing connections, I found the critical piece of information. The sole officer listed on the incorporation documents was Ethan's brother-in-law. The company was an elaborate shell created for a single criminal purpose. It existed only to siphon money through fraudulent consulting contracts. Suddenly, the entire plan for the Crestwood Tower project became horrifyingly clear. The revenge was real, but it was just a component of a larger crime. I was not just the target of his hatred, I was his alibi. He was setting me up to be the scapegoat for a massive fraud. All my documented failures were pieces of evidence to be used against me. When the money disappeared, the blame would fall squarely on my shoulders. I was the manager with the documented history of poor oversight. The power of this knowledge was a terrifying weight in my gut. Ethan was not just a cruel man, he was a careful and patient criminal. I started to feel a creeping sense of paranoia in my basement office. I felt like I was being watched through the network. Every system alert made me think that they had discovered my search. I copied all the evidence onto a small encrypted flash drive. The fate of my enemy was now in the palm of my hand. I held the flash drive in my hand for an entire day. It was a small piece of plastic containing another man's complete ruin. I understood that going to human resources would be a fatal mistake. Ethan was a director, and his corporate allies were powerful. My accusations would be dismissed as the actions of a disgruntled employee. I needed to place the weapon into hands that would actually use it. My plan was simple and designed to be completely untraceable. I would not be the whistleblower, merely an anonymous source of information. I identified two separate targets who would ensure the evidence was used. The first was an investigative journalist who ran a small but feared industry blog. She had a reputation for destroying careers with well-researched, brutal articles. The second target was the private equity firm funding the Crestwood Tower. They were the primary investors with billions of dollars on the line. They would show absolutely no mercy to a man defrauding their investment. I bought 2 new flash drives from a convenience store in another town. I used a public library computer to copy the encrypted data onto them. I placed each drive into a simple padded envelope without any note. The evidence was strong enough to tell its own damning story. Explanations would only reveal a motive, and my motive was irrelevant. I drove to 2 different post offices and mailed the packages. I felt no satisfaction as I dropped them into the blue metal boxes. There was no sense of victory, only the cold finality of an irreversible act. My part in this long and painful story was finally over. That night, I used my security badge one last time to enter the office. I went down to the basement and left everything on the desk. My laptop, my company phone, and my access badge. I did not write a letter of resignation. My disappearance would be a more fitting conclusion to my career. I walked out of the building and did not look back at all. I live in a small apartment on the other side of the city now. It is a furnished place with no personal history on its walls. My days are quiet and have no discernible shape or purpose. I bought a new phone with a number that nobody from my old life knows. I follow the news about my former company on a cheap laptop. The journalist's blog post was the first story to break the scandal. It was a precise and merciless article that detailed the entire fraud. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for everyone involved in the project. The primary investors filed a massive lawsuit against the firm. Ethan Hayes was fired, and his name appeared in federal investigation reports. The company's stock price collapsed in a matter of a few days. I read these updates without any sense of emotion or personal satisfaction. It was like reading about a disaster in a foreign country. My old life and all the people in it felt completely unreal. I have not tried to contact Sarah, and she has not tried to find me. The man she saw in the office that night was the real me. The ambitious student who stole a project was the same man who retaliated. My obsession with revenge had burned down the last of our bridges. I do freelance drafting work now for cash, enough to pay my rent. From my apartment window, I can see the distant shape of the city. The unfinished skeleton of the Crestwood Tower stands against the skyline. All work on the project has stopped indefinitely. It is a tall, empty monument to greed and to my own actions. I look at it every day, but I do not feel anything. There was no justice, and there is no peace in what I did. I ruined a man's life for the second time in my own. There was no lesson learned, just the wreckage left behind. If you enjoyed this video, support it with a like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Your reaction helps me create new stories.